Okay, welcome. We are glad to have you join us today. This presentation is for the InnoCrowd Extend series. Today is Extending Workday Extend. Our presenters today are Nicholas Trandom and Seth Fetzer. This webinar will be recorded and we will send it out to those who are in attendance. If you have any questions that come up during or after the presentation, please enter them in the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen. We have dedicated time after the presentation where Nicholas and Seth will answer questions that are entered. I will now turn the time over to Nicholas.
Thanks, Erica. My name is Nicholas Trandom. I'm a manager and the lead Workday Extend architect here at IntoCrowd, recently named by Workday as an Extend product lead. I have over 20 years of technical experience and leadership in full stack custom application development, and I'm very excited to be able to use that in the Workday ecosystem now with Extend. I've been working with Extend since it came out. I've been in multiple hackathons and the architect lead developer on several complex Extend applications, and I'm certified in Extend as well as Integration Studio and CCTPP. Seth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Nicholas. So I'm Seth Fetzer. I've been a software developer for a little over 15 years, been within a crowd for a little over 3, and I'm also Extend certified and integration certified. Been working with Extend for a couple years now, and looking forward to showing you what we're up to.
Seth's too modest to point it out, but he was on the winning team for the 2020 Workday Hackathon that just finished just a while ago. So congratulations, Seth.
Thank you.
A little bit about IntoCrowd now. We are a boutique Workday partner. We have 100% focus on Workday technologies. We do it all within that space, from HCM through all the different SKUs of Workday. We are an acknowledged thought leader in Workday Extend, along with the hackathon win this year in 2020. We've been at the forefront of that technology since it came out. We also develop products to help maximize the return on investment for Workday customers. We do Phase X deployments, integration work streams, and we have an application managed services offering, which is an on-call center of excellence for getting the most out of Workday. We have an average of over 5 certifications per consultant, and we have 24 or 25 product leads now within Workday. So we definitely have a very strong emphasis on being technical leaders in this space. So let's take a look at the agenda now. We're going to be talking about why you would want to extend the Workday Extend offering, why we recommend using AWS for that, some best practices around doing development in this kind of hybrid approach. And then we'll look at a reference app that kind of highlights some of those best practices and how you can enhance the functionality of Workday Extend using a third-party tool like AWS. And then at the end, we'll have questions. So jumping right in here, why would you extend? Well, just like putting booster rockets on a shuttle, it can take you further, right? When you can't really accomplish what your business needs with the current out-of-the-box functionality from Workday Extend. Now, Workday Extend is great because it allows you to extend Workday and to build capabilities within the Workday technology stack. However, sometimes it's not going to have everything you need right out of the box. Some of that functionality might be coming on the roadmap. But if that is a year or so away, safe harbor applies, of course, is it worth waiting for that? Will you lose return on investment if you wait for that? In fact, we have a customer right now that just went live with their first Workday Extend application, and they know that if they had waited longer into late next year, they could probably do everything within the Workday technology stack. But the return on investment for their application is so high that it was worth it for them to extend the capabilities, the current available capabilities Workday Extend with AWS to be able to put this application into production earlier and be able to capitalize on that savings. So in other words, you don't need to have your business's plans be contingent or tied to the roadmap for Workday Extend if you have this additional tool in your back pocket to be able to extend the capabilities. Some functionality will never be on the Workday Extend roadmap. So what do you do then? Does that leave you at a dead end if that's never going to be functional there or available there in the Workday Extend out of the box capabilities? Well, no, if you have this ability to pull in a third-party platform or service, you can do that using Extend and that service and provide the kind of functionality your business needs. And finally, we talked about the economic sense of not being tied to the roadmap for Workday Extend capabilities. But even once things are available in Workday in one form or another, there may be reasons, economic or technical or security reasons, why it may make sense to keep part of the application, whether that's persistence or messaging or business logic, in a third-party system. It may just work out better in terms of the bandwidth usage, whatever your constraints are, to have that in a third-party system and not have everything entirely in the Workday stack. And so those are kind of a lot of the reasons that we look at and we ask customers to look at when we talk to them about what Extend can do and what it can do when we take it even further with a third-party platform such as AWS. So next, Seth is going to kind of walk us through why we recommend AWS for this kind of hybrid approach.
Thanks, Nicholas. So AWS isn't the only game in town, right? So we have other options like Azure or even an on-premises server. And as a software developer for well over a decade, I can tell you that Azure can do everything that we're going to do in AWS. And so could an on-premises server. However, AWS has a leg up on both of those other options for a couple reasons. Number one is that it has authentication and security built right into Workday presentation services. And so what that allows you to do is save a bunch of time configuring security and configuring all of that authentication required to be able to keep everything secure. Another thing is that AWS has a great online development and deployment environment called Cloud9 and the other thing. And what it allows you to do is it gets all that configured in a hurry, and then you can just get straight into development. But that's not, just because it's the best game in town doesn't mean it doesn't have any issues. So one of the things that you're going to have to pay attention to if you do decide to go with AWS is look at your maintenance cycle. So having an application outside of Workday means that you're going to have to maintain an application outside of Workday. And that might not be the appropriate thing for you, or it could be the appropriate thing for you, depending on what your needs are. Another thing is AWS isn't free. So there could be a situation where you have something, a heavy data load that you would have to move from Workday to AWS, and that might not be useful to you, or that might not be economically available. And then the third thing is an audit trail. So if you have a transaction that starts in Workday and then you pull it over to AWS, and then it does some logic in AWS and then comes back into Workday, and you need to follow that audit trail all the way through, you're going to have to make sure that you think about that as in your development plan, to make sure that the auditing that you need for to make business sense for you can be covered with all of your needs. So Nicholas is going to go and talk about a little bit more about best practices and covering all of those situations.
Thanks, Seth. So I'm gonna give a little overview of some best practices here, and then we're gonna deep dive on each of them. We're going to be using some specific services in AWS to really enhance the way that we do this hybrid approach and make it very clean and easy to use. The first is going to be, we're going to ensure clean boundaries between Workday and AWS by using API Gateway. And we'll get into all the advantages that that's going to give us in the next slide. A lot of the capabilities that we want to enhance Workday Extend with are little pieces of functionality. A little DynamoDB or other database table, a little bit of business logic, a topic or a queue. These are the kinds of things that AWS makes it possible to stand up without standing up a whole big server and infrastructure. We can use a serverless approach, as it's called, to have these little bits of functionality that just kind of live in the AWS cloud. And because we're using that serverless approach, we can use AWS CodeStar, which Seth mentioned just briefly earlier, and that's going to give us this very, very nice, easy to bootstrap development environment that's going to give us a lot of capabilities very quickly to be able to follow best practices with our development. We're going to use CloudFormation. This, we'll get into more details again soon, but CloudFormation is going to allow us to really control all these little pieces of functionality that we're building in AWS to have their configuration, their specifications all laid out very nicely for us and controlled. And that's going to lead us into the next best practice, which is using code pipeline to do automated deployments. And we're going to use those automated deployments not just to build and deploy our code in our development environment, but we'll be able to use that across multiple AWS accounts so that we can have an isolated, dedicated AWS account to match our tenant management strategy. And so that the two pieces of our application, Workday Extend and AWS, can stay in lockstep as we go through the development cycle and through the different environments. And finally, with all of Workday Extend, but especially here when we're bringing in these additional tools, we're really in the realm of custom software development now, and we really want to be cognizant of the great set of best practices that have developed over the last couple of decades around software development. And we want to make sure that we're following those so that we can avoid the known issues, the known traps that can get in the way of a lot of different software development projects. So with that, I'm going to jump right into our first deep dive, which is on API Gateway. So all of the services in AWS have their own APIs. You can directly call a Lambda, you can directly call DynamoDB. So why go through API Gateway? What does this extra layer give us? Well, we get a lot of advantages going through API Gateway. The first is that it really helps us to bridge the gap, if it exists, between what VPS wants and what AWS wants, and make very friendly, VPS-friendly endpoints. A great example of this is DynamoDB. DynamoDB, very powerful tool, very old and creaky API. Every call to DynamoDB, whether you just want to get data or what, it is going to be an HTTP post request. Now, VPS doesn't like that much. VPS has two types of pages, and VPS is the Visual Presentation Services. If you're not familiar with the Workday Extend technology, it's the part of Workday Extend that gives you the pages within Workday. And so there's two types of those pages. There's a view page and an edit page. The view page is for just showing data to the user. They're expecting to be able to make an HTTP GET request. And so that's not going to work real well with Dynamo. But what we can do with API Gateway is we can take that GET request coming from VPS. We can translate that into a post request that goes to Dynamo. And now both ends are happy. And then Dynamo is going to reply, and I'm going to pick on it again, is that its replies in its API are very verbose, very complex, and have a lot of stuff that you really don't care about on your VPS front end. So what we can also do with API Gateway is transform that reply from Dynamo into something that's going to be very easy to consume in a Workday Extend page. And so we are avoiding a lot of complexity, both on the AWS side and on the Workday Extend side by using API Gateway to kind of glue those two sides together. Finally, API Gateway gives us the ability to really finely control the security of our application. To be able to access our endpoints in API Gateway from Extend, we use the built-in capabilities that Seth talked about earlier, which is that we're going to take a system user in AWS, we're going to create a key and a secret, and we're going to take that key and secret and put it into our Workday tenant in what's called the AWS cred store within the tenant. And then Workday Extend can securely use those credentials to talk to AWS. Now we can give that user, that system user in AWS, we give that user the minimum of security, only to call API Gateway, in fact, only to call the endpoints we want it to call. We can do as many keys and secrets, as many different users with different permissions as we want to be able to finally control the security on these endpoints. And the benefit there is that those credentials, which are the only credentials, the only security that we're taking out of AWS and putting somewhere else in the tenant in this case, they only have access to API Gateway. They have no permissions beyond that to the backend services that our endpoints in API Gateway are actually talking to. So there's no way, even if those credentials are compromised, to do any sort of end run around API Gateway and go directly to the database or directly to the backend services. So it gives us a very strong security model when we use API Gateway. So that in a nutshell is why we really recommend using API Gateway and architecting your application to only talk to AWS through the gateway. So with that, I'm going to hand it off for our next deep dive back to Seth, and he'll be talking about the development environment.
So Nicholas just talked about a whole bunch of AWS technologies. He talked about API Gateway and DynamoDB and security accounts and a little bit on Lambda, and all of that stuff exists in AWS on different pages, which can be difficult as a developer to be able to manage all of those things. Enter AWS CodeStar, which allows you to manage all of those things in one environment. And we say it's turnkey because it's really just a click of a button and you immediately get a console to configure all your code. You get automatic version control, you get an automatic release configuration, so you can really just get straight into development of the application. So when you start, you get a automatic serverless application model template, a SAM template, and that can be configured and used with CloudFormation, which allows you to make all of these things individually, and Nicholas is going to go into that in just a minute. But every update to your system, every update that you make gets automatically built into when you push to your version control system. It'll automatically build and it triggers a build that updates everything in AWS for you. So if you make a change to your API Gateway endpoint, or a change to your Lambda function, or a change to your database model, it gets automatically built into that. And that CodeStar allows you to really just control everything from one location, which is why we really enjoy using it. So Nicholas is going to dive into CloudFormation a little bit more here.
Thanks, Seth. CloudFormation allows us to have a specification for our entire application. All of the components, be they database tables, lambdas, IAM users, topics, queues, all of that can be specified in a human readable format in a template file. That template then becomes the blueprint of the entire application. And that gives us full control over what's going to be deployed and how it's going to be configured. When we take that template and run it through CloudFormation using Code Pipeline, which Seth will talk about next, and that all is built in again to the CodeStar environment that Seth was just explaining. That's going to allow us to just automatically build that entire application into an AWS account. And then once it's built there, we can actually run what's called drift detection. What that means is that we have a way of telling what has changed since the deployment. So for example, let's say that we deploy our application with a log level set to info. So all of our Lambdas are going to be logging at the info level. And we need to debug a specific Lambda. So we go in to the Lambda console where it's been installed, because once we install with CloudFormation, these AWS services are available through their normal console. You don't have to go back to your code development environment and push configuration changes all the way through. So we'll go into the Lambda console, we'll change that particular Lambda to a debug log level. And we'll be able to debug and see the debug logs there. If we have done that and we run this drift detection, we'll immediately be informed that this Lambda no longer matches what was deployed because it was deployed with an info level. And so that's kind of a simple example, but what the power of drift detection gives us is to be able to know very quickly and easily if anything that we've deployed to a specific AWS environment has changed from what we actually put into the template and deployed. It's a very powerful capability and allows us to have a really good control over what is actually running and configured in our different environments. And so we use CloudFormation along with code pipeline to achieve these code deployments to the multiple accounts. And so Seth will go into a little more detail on that next.
So when you are working through your development process, you're going to do this in Workday in a development tenant, and then an implementation tenant, and then move up to your sandbox and production tenants. Well, with AWS, we recommend you do the same thing. So we recommend that you create a separate account for each of those tenants, which allows you to to secure it and have specific data to each tenant. And what this does is it keeps it nice and lockstep as you move up in your development process. Now, this doesn't cost you anything in AWS other than your regular usage. And what Code Pipeline does is once its Code Pipeline is configured, when you trigger your automatic build with CodeStar, so you check something into version control, it will build automatically into your development environment, and then everything is good to go. So you can move up into your implementation environment where you have a snapshot of your production environment. You have all of your workers ready to go. Maybe you've opened up security for some of your testers to make sure that everything works. You click a button, everything moves up, and now you can test in there with separate security from your production environment. And it doesn't have all the test data that you had from your development environment. It's really closer to actual production without actually being production. And then once you're ready to go to production, it's one more click of a button. Code Pipeline will push everything up to production, and you're ready to go. So what this does is Code Pipeline is really the tool that we use to keep everything configured to each environment so that it is very closely attached to each of your Workday tenants. And VPS, so Visual Presentation Services, this is part of the Workday Extend, is smart enough to know what environment it's in. So there's no hard coding required for us to be able to do this in each environment. VPS will know what environment it's in and go to the appropriate AWS account for you to do that. So Nicholas is going to go on and tell us a little bit more about best practices.
Thank you, Seth. So again, this is not quite the same as integration development. Integration development has a lot more walls to it, a lot more guardrails. Even if you're doing custom studio, you're still largely doing point-to-point solutions. You've got a fairly defined end goal in sight. When you're talking about custom software development, you often think you have a clear view of what the end goal is, but a lot of times there's a lot more nebulous kind of unknowns that need to be sorted out in there. So we really recommend putting a lot of effort into design. Make sure that your project plan includes plenty of time for design. Our last webinar in this series, webinar number 2, that was all about design for Workday Extend. We can get the recording to you if you'd like, if you weren't able to join us for that one. We also recommend that your project plan take into account iteration. With this sort of custom solution, you really want to get pieces of functionality in front of the end users for testing as soon as possible, so that you can take their feedback and incorporate that and change gears if you need to very quickly. This is not kind of the standard integration model of get a design doc and then go dark for a couple of weeks while you build it and then bring it back for testing. This really, you want to have this back and forth with the users as things develop, because it's a much more nebulous and a much more open-ended solution here. Unit tests are key, especially we saw with CodeStar. Whenever you are pushing your code into the repository, whenever you make a change, CodeStar is going to run all your unit tests for you automatically when it does that build and deploy to the development environment. So you will know if your unit tests are good, you'll know immediately if something has been broken by that change, and it won't get deployed, because as soon as that unit test fails, the deployment to dev stops. So by making use of unit tests, we can really be crisp about how our changes are affecting everything, not have regressions introduced by changes that we make. And finally, code reviews. We definitely want to get lots of pairs of eyes on the code, looking at what's going on and looking for best practices, performance, and so on. So we really recommend following those best practices. Now, a real quick demo here of just a very simple reference app that's going to be available very shortly on Community. This is a business book review. And we're going to go in here and we're going to review Mindset and say that it's a great book about growth mindset. When we create this review, we can see, now we can see this review right in Workday, but this data actually isn't living in Workday at all. This data is living out in DynamoDB. So we can see that we've just created this item out in DynamoDB. We can go in again and make changes to that. Change the color. Change the text, and again we see the changes here in Workday, but the data is actually living out here in Dynamo. And again, how we're doing that is we're using API Gateway. We're securing it with that IAM user we talked about, using the key and the secret that are in the cred store in the tenant. And we're taking that GET request from Workday Extend and making it a post to Dynamo, so that both sides are happy about that. And then on the way back out, as we mentioned, we're going to take the very complex Dynamo response and we're going to translate that into a very simple list of book review items that will be very simple for Workday Extend VPS to digest and display in this kind of grid. So again, this reference app will be available shortly on Community. If you want to check it out and give it a try, you should be able to do this with free tier eligible AWS items. So if you are careful about it, you won't get charged anything for trying this out with AWS. And with that, we will open it up for questions.
Thanks, Nicholas. I do have a question. Have you done this sort of work with a live customer?
Yes, we're in the middle of an engagement to do 2 Workday Extend applications for a customer right at the moment. We just went live with the first one. The second one is going live next month. So far, the customer's been thrilled with it, and it's really helped them to, again, not be beholden to the roadmap timing of functionality in Workday Extend, but to be able to have an application that lives in Extend and does everything that they need it to do right now by pulling in this additional functionality from AWS.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you all have a great day.